Back to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. We're back in Champions League action on Wednesday night, which means it's the return of the big match preview. Hey, everybody, how's it going? Welcome back along to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. It's the big match preview, and on this episode, we're looking ahead to Arsenal's clash with Sevilla, coming up, of course, on Wednesday night at Emirates Stadium. And what a big night it could be for the Gunners, having waited so long to get back into the Champions League. We have an opportunity now, of course, on Wednesday to book our place, potentially in the knockout stages, which would be pretty cool. I know it's a group that you look at and we're expected to get through and all of that, and it's not going to be one of those, moments that leads to you jumping up and down and over celebrating and all the rest of it. But it would be a fist pump moment, wouldn't it, at the very least? Because we've found our way back into the competition after a number of years out of it. We've worked really hard, I think, as a football club in terms of trying to turn things around to put ourselves in a position where we should be qualifying for this competition now for a number of years to come. And, at the start of the season, looking at the group and looking at how Arsenal had performed last season in what's, regarded as one of the best leagues in Europe, if not the best league in Europe, with the exception of the VAR. I promise I won't mention it too many times on this episode. But when you think about that and you think about the fact that the Premier League sides have often been very, very far in the competition, have been very strong in the competition because of the level of squads that they have, the finance that they have available to them in comparison to the Italian teams, for example. You do look at yourself if you're a top Premier League team and think, yeah, I've got a really good chance of winning this. So we're not in the Champions League this year just to make up the numbers. It's not one of those, oh, but we're just happy to be here kind of things. That would be the mentality of another club in North London, dare I say it. We're here to really go for it, to really give it a good go. And I'm really, really looking forward to hopefully progressing to the knockout stages and then seeing how far this young, hungry, and united Arsenal team can go. And I think it's going to be fascinating. Hope you're all good. Hope you're all well. A big thank you to everybody joining us in the live chat box. As always great to see you guys. Remember, if you're listening on audio, on whatever platform it is, please do leave us a review. I only realized the other day, right? So when you search for the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast on Spotify, for some reason, it comes up with duplicate feeds. And I've had one stored on my Spotify for about, I don't know, 2 years. And it says 11 reviews. And I look at it and I'm like, man, looking at the statistics, looking at how many of you are tuning in via Spotify, why have I only got 11 reviews on the podcast? Like, it was driving me mental. Like, I just couldn't figure out why that was the case. And then I went on to the other feed, which I thought was a duplication, exactly the same. But guess what? That one's got nearly 500 reviews. So a big thank you, because I keep asking you for reviews. I'm sitting there thinking, for God's sake, why aren't they doing it? But you actually are. So thank you. Really, really appreciate that. I think we're about 5 or so reviews away on Spotify from 500. So if we could get there, that would be great, wouldn't it? Thank you all so much. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the channel. You know the deal. You know how much of a difference it makes. If you've got any questions throughout the show, feel free to chuck them in. We will do a dedicated Q&A bit at the end. So if you keep a hold of them for then, that'll probably be better. Just means that there's less chance of them getting lost in the chat box. But without dragging it on too much, let's start to look ahead to this game. In fact, I got to bring you up to speed on one more thing. I got to point you in the direction of one more thing before we do that. But just to give you a rundown of what we're going to discuss on this show, it is the big match preview show. So we're going to look ahead to Arsenal versus Sevilla at Emirates Stadium tomorrow night. We're going to discuss team news. We're going to review Mikel Arteta's press conference. I'm going to share with you guys the lineup that I would like to see Mikel Arteta select for this one. We're also going to talk, interestingly, about who's going to play up front, and you'll know why when I give you some of the team news a little bit later on. We're also going to talk a little bit about Thomas Partey, because some rumours, some reports, I should say, is the right way to put it, have emerged over the last 24 hours, suggesting that Thomas Partey's injury that he's currently out with could actually be worse than initially feared, and that actually Thomas Partey is now not expected to return until the new year, which is a massive, massive blow if true. Now, just to be clear, there's been no sort of confirmation on that from the club. The club haven't commented on that. And we know that under Mikel Arteta, they're very tight-lipped when it comes to injuries. So, yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. But that is not good, is it? That's not what you want to be hearing. The thing I wanted to point you guys in the direction of is the other episode that we dropped earlier today. Amira in the chat says 2 shows in one day. What a treat. That's what happens when I work from home. As you guys know, last week we started a brand new series on the channel called The Debrief, the show in which we seek to explore some of the wider topics in football. But of course, given Arsenal's sort of involvement in some real controversy over the weekend, Mikel Arteta's outburst, the club statement that followed, I felt like it was worthwhile focusing on the VAR / standard of officiating issue. And I wanted to get a top guest on to do that with me, which is why the debrief that normally comes out on a Monday came out on Tuesday this week, because I needed to work around my brilliant guest. And I promise, if you haven't seen it or listened to it already, the wait was worth it. This was a fascinating conversation with Keith Hackett, who was the head of the PGMOL a number of years ago and is responsible for a lot of the positive change, actually, that we've seen in refereeing over the years. Now, it might be difficult to comprehend that there has been positive change, given what we're seeing sort of week after week at the moment. But, you know, some of the technology, goal line tech, the communication kits, these are things that Keith Hackett introduced. These are things that Keith Hackett really pushed for, and they've made a real big positive difference. So it was a fascinating conversation. It is available now on this very YouTube channel. It's the last video, or you can, of course, download it wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And I thought what I'd do is, rather than tell you how good it is and how worthwhile it is, and please do tune in, I'm going to just show you guys and let you guys listen to a very, very quick trailer from the episode. And I'm sure this will whet your appetite. Check it out.
But what we've got is we've got a skewed interpretation coming out of PGMOL. He's inherited a declining group of referees thanks to the poor management of Mike Riley, the former boss. Sadly, we've seen the decline, and we've got a very small number of what I consider to be world-class referees, whereas perhaps in my day we had about 10 out of the 20.
Off the top of your head, how many would you say that we have now in the Premier League?
4. We're hung up on what's clear and obvious. Well, for me, it's clear and obvious. That's a push. Howard Webb is a brilliant communicator, and I know behind the scenes he'll be working very hard to try and get changes in flow. He's inherited a lot of people. The PGMOL is not functioning satisfactorily to all the stakeholders in the game. And therefore, Howard, being the leader, has got to show leadership. He's got to develop a pair, and he's got to do the hard things. And I think what you'd be saying, Harry, is this: if you're the referee and you're going to be scathed on TV, doesn't it put the pressure on you to not make that mistake next time?
Yeah.
This is just like the number 9 who's not hitting the back of the net. Was a competent Premier League referee. He lost his form. I fired him.
Now, there's a man who knows his apples from his oranges. Former head of the PGMOL and former FIFA referee Keith Hackett, as I say, joined me earlier on today. And I have to say a big thank you to Keith. I did say it to him on the show, but to give you an idea of how deep this conversation went, right? When I texted Keith yesterday and we spoke about doing the show, I asked him for 20 minutes of his time, and we spoke for over an hour and a half. So there's lots and lots to get into, with some great stories along the way as well. So that's the debrief, which you can find now on all major podcast stores, of course, under the Chronicles of a Gooner feed, and of course on our YouTube channel. Right, let's move on. Okay, Arsenal versus Sevilla. And of course, as mentioned, the Gunners can qualify for the knockout stages. So what needs to happen for Arsenal to be guaranteed a place in the round of 16? Well, if Arsenal were to win their game against Sevilla, that would put the Gunners onto 9 points, 7 clear of Sevilla, with 2 games to go. So it would be impossible for them to catch us. Lens, of course, are on 5 points. They take on PSV Eindhoven. And if Lens are to beat PSV Eindhoven, that would mean that they remain on 2 points as well. And Arsenal would be clear of PSV also. The Dutch side would also now be in a position whereby it's impossible to leapfrog Arsenal. So if we can make sure that 2 of the remaining 3, I should say, can't get above us, then obviously we qualify. But, the group winners title would still be up for grabs, and that could be interesting. And obviously you want to win the group, right? You want to get a better draw, theoretically at least. It doesn't always work out like that in the next round. So, yeah, it could be a really, really positive night for Arsenal tomorrow. Talking about Sevilla and sort of what we saw from them in the Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan last month. I was out there, made the trip. Beautiful, beautiful city and place, by the way. Highly recommend it. I felt like at times they were really tidy and they were really sort of competent, and they made life difficult for us. But I also thought at times they showed weakness. And I think that Arsenal, at times maybe just needed to up it a couple of gears in order to, find the spaces and really exploit them and punish them. And, it just felt like at times we were kind of cruising through segments of that game. I think the word to describe Arsenal's performance that night was probably professional. I think there was an element of, sort of making sure that we don't burn out too quick. There was an element of making sure that we keep control of the narrative, keep control of the atmosphere by playing in a certain way. And we saw, brilliance from Gabriel Jesus, not just once, but twice, to score us the goals. The first moment, he brought the ball down out of the air, spectacularly spun and played Martinelli in with a perfect pass, who rounded the goalkeeper and slotted home. Remember, Martinelli had an opportunity earlier in the game as well that again was created by Gabriel Jesus, who we're going to be without tomorrow. Mikel Arteta has confirmed. And then sort of towards the end of the game in the second half, after starting the second half, I thought quite well, with Jesus scoring himself and scoring a brilliant goal, we ended up being in a situation where we were kind of holding on at the end. And that was a little bit annoying. Like, I did come away from the game obviously incredibly pleased. I was in the ground. I know exactly how difficult the atmosphere was. I know exactly how intimidating a place it can be. And I know exactly, what Sevilla are all about when it comes to European competition. They've got so much history, and it is something that you feel, I think, when you're there. You look at how Arsenal coped with the trip to Lens earlier in the group, and the truth is they didn't cope at all. They were really, really poor that night. Again, in a place with a partisan atmosphere. And again, it was a side that, yes, on paper, you'd say that we're far superior to, but still, those away games, the atmosphere, especially in Europe, I think can be a leveler at times. So I was wary of the Sevilla trip. And although, I was satisfied with 80% of the performance, there still was just a slight risk and a slight concern in my mind that we were going to end up sort of throwing it away. And we nearly did. So that means that going into this game at Emirates Stadium, although theoretically it should be easier, you're at home, all the rest of it, I'm not going to take Sevilla lightly. I will not take Sevilla lightly. I will not take anyone lightly that is in the UEFA Champions League. I just don't think you can afford to. I hope that Mikel Arteta isn't going to make too many changes to the side that played at Newcastle the other day. I suspect he might make some changes. You look at the fact that we've got Burnley, who have been really, really poor so far this season in the Premier League, I think it's fair to say. And, if I had to gamble on one fixture in terms of, making those additional 2 or 3 changes that can sometimes destabilize the team, I think that might be the one that I'd be looking at now. I'd want to wrap up qualification from Group B for the knockout stages. And I think that, you may see Mikel Arteta make slightly less changes tomorrow, with the hope that he can make a few more, or have even a couple of players back against Burnley, which brings some fresh legs, but also some experienced legs. It's going to be fascinating to see what he does. And we'll talk about the team in a little while. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we cannot take them lightly. I said it ahead of the West Ham game when we did the big match preview for our Carabao Cup clash with West Ham United. I said that, these were the this was the volume of changes that I expected. I picked a team sort of based on that. I didn't get it spot on. I think I was a couple of players off, but and again, to be clear, that was the team that I wanted. I wanted Declan Rice in the team. I know a lot of you didn't, and your reasoning for that, you don't want to take a risk, was fair and justified, I think. But the point I was making was that when you make too many changes, it does destabilize, it does cause problems. And I remember somebody specifically at the end of the show in the live comments when I gave my prediction, and my prediction was that West Ham were going to win. I remember somebody saying, well, why'd you pick that team then if you're going to lose? Because it all comes down to priorities, right? We knew that we needed to make changes. We knew that we had a trip to Newcastle to come at the weekend. We knew that was going to be a game that would be very physically taxing. And it turns out that it was not just physically, but emotionally taxing as well in the end. And I was concerned about that. And, in this fixture, I think that, it's probably not going to be as physically taxing. I don't think it normally is when you play a Spanish side, for example, because I think the tempo with which they play is a little bit different. And I think that can make a difference. But that doesn't mean that you can take these sides lightly. These are the Europa League holders. This is a side that have a very rich history in European competition, as we've already highlighted, and have a lot of talented players within their ranks. So for me, looking at it right now, I'd probably go stronger with the idea of, if I have to then make changes later on in the week, those coming against Burnley rather than Sevilla. But that's just my opinion on it. Okay, let's take it on. Mikel Arteta gave his press conference earlier today, and we're going to touch on some of the key points from that. Mikel Arteta defended himself with regards to what has been described as an outburst. I think some of the reaction to this generally has been embarrassing. I think that we see managers fly off the handle very often when it comes to bad decisions. And the reason we see them fly off the handle in the way that they do is twofold, right? Number one, there's so much at stake. If you're Mikel Arteta and you're hoping to pit Manchester City to the title, in the back of your mind, it is there. It is a seed that is planted. You know that you can ill afford to make too many mistakes over the course of the season. And by mistakes, I mean drop points. This is a side that have been relentless for years and years and years. And you cannot afford to give them any advantages. We beat them a couple of weeks ago, and now they're 3 points clear of us. That's how quickly the tide can turn. And Mikel Arteta, I think, had a bit of that in his mind, but also has felt this way with regards to the standard of officiating and the PGMOL over a long period of time. That's why we hear that Arsenal have compiled a list of incidents to go and discuss with the PGMOL. That's why Mikel Arteta went so big the way he did, and that's why the club felt that they were happy to come out and put out a statement that supported Mikel Arteta, knowing full well that there could be a charge, knowing full well that something could come of it. There would be clubs out there that would say, no, you know what, manager, your comments, you're on your own, mate. You take whatever punishment is coming your way. I don't necessarily think that's right, but I think the club have clearly been in discussions with the PGMOL over a period of time. For them to have come out and supported Mikel Arteta the way they did tells me that those conversations have happened internally, but those conversations have also taken place between Arsenal, representatives of Arsenal, and of the PGMOL as well. Mikel Arteta was adamant that he did nothing wrong, and he said that if he did it again, if he had to do it again, or if that situation were to arise again, he would defend his club once again with no hesitation. In terms of team news, no news on Martin Odegaard yet, who of course missed the game at Newcastle. He was asked during the press conference if he regretted using him against West Ham United. Remember, I said that as well. It just felt like a needless change to make, given that we had Newcastle and that game was done and dusted at 3-0. He says that the two problems, so the one that Odegaard faced ahead of the game that we played at the weekend, my head's gone in terms of who it was. Was it Sheffield United? I think, he highlighted that, that problem, the problem that saw Martin Odegaard miss the last Premier League game, was not related to the problem that he then picked up in training that meant he missed out on Newcastle. So, I don't know if that's true, but that's what Mikel Arteta's told us today. He also confirmed that Gabriel Jesus is unavailable. There had been some rumours over the last few days that actually he was well ahead of schedule and that he was, in contention to return. Brazil have called him up to the national squad. Odegaard has also been called up to his national squad, which at the very least tells us that there's been no communication between Arsenal and those national teams to say this player is definitely out for X amount of time. So I'm hopeful, especially in Odegaard's case, that he might even be available tomorrow. But then later on in the day, we found out who trained and who didn't. So we'll come on to that in a bit because, that's different to Mikel telling us, I'm not sure yet. So just to summarize, no news on Odegaard yet. This is what he told us in the press conference. Jesus is unavailable. There's no news on the other players that are, of course, sidelined. Arteta was asked about his outburst, if you want to call it that. And he was asked if this was due to a build-up of incidents and conversations. And he suggested that without sort of directly saying it. He also highlighted and was very keen to highlight that he wasn't booked for his conduct at the weekend. And when asked about sort of coming out and speaking, I think Gary Neville labelled Mikel Arteta's sort of rant or tirade, whatever you want to call it, as dangerous, or that the club's statement was dangerous. He said, look, when we feel that there's an injustice or there's something that we need to get off our chest, we have to talk loudly. He said, you can't take a problem that you have and just put it in the drawer in your desk and ignore it and hope and expect that it will just evaporate or disappear. He goes, at some point it's going to stink. And at some point you're going to have to face the issue and deal with it head on. So, I think Mikel Arteta was spot on in everything he said. I'm glad he didn't backtrack. I'm glad he, dug his heels in. And as I highlighted, not just on TalkSport yesterday, but on Twitter as well, he didn't totally dismiss the incident between Tottenham and Liverpool. And I kind of have to give Mikel Arteta an apology myself on this, because when I sort of saw those comments sort of being cycled around on Sunday morning when I sat down to record our post-Newcastle show, I have to say, maybe I was a bit lazy, because I didn't go and sort of read up what he said in the Lens press conference, which was in between, of course, the Liverpool-Tottenham incident and then the next Premier League press conference that he did. And actually what he did say was, I hope that Liverpool get what they deserve, obviously in a positive way. And he talked about how it's incredibly frustrating that when you prepare, when you set your team up and all the rest of it, you then have the game or the outcome dictated by something that's out of your hands. So to be fair to Mikel Arteta, he did address that. For some reason, that seems to have completely gone under the radar. Now, that was bad on my part that I didn't go back and check the Lens press conference, and that I only went with the press conference that he gave in the league, the next one that he gave in the league, because that's what a lot of people were doing, and that's bad on my part. I should have done the research. But when I did, and I shared that on Monday morning on TalkSport, Ali McCoist and Andy Townsend were trying to wind me up about it, and I basically said, after they played the clip that Arteta said, mistakes happen in football, I said, actually, you've missed one. You've missed one. You have. And I think it's important to highlight that. There's also a clip going around today of Ange Postecoglou slagging off referees and criticizing them and calling VAR a theatre, whatever. Yesterday, though, for some reason, he was getting all the praise in the world. I mean, it's wild the way that they can paint somebody as a villain and just, really go at them constantly, and yet others get painted as angels. And that's why if you go back to the cover of the Debrief today, you'll see Arteta with a pair of horns and Ange Postecoglou with a halo, because apparently he's the angel at the moment. He's slagged off referees before. Every manager at the top level has, because every manager would have been on the receiving end of decisions that infuriated them. And when you interview these people directly after a game, you are going to get that from time to time. You are going to get that. Ange Postecoglou gets all the praise in the world for everything he says, everything he does, and it is starting to grind on me, because he has criticised referees very strongly during his time at Celtic. He did get booked yesterday for arguing and being out of his technical area. Nobody's been talking about that. All they've been talking about is his post-match comments. Well, it's very easy in your post-match interview or post-match press conference to be quite level-headed about the officials when you've gone into your changing room after a game, watched the evidence presented or against your two players that were sent off, and you can't argue it. If anything, looking back at that game, which was highly entertaining, by the way, Udogie, judging by what Keith Hackett told me earlier today, should have been sent off in the first instance. Christian Romero could have been sent off in the first instance. And he had another bite at the cherry, and he still managed to cross that line and concede a penalty in the process. So Tottenham can have no complaints, really, with the officiating yesterday. It was good. It was good. It was much better than what we saw up at St. James's Park. But the point I'm trying to make here that I've digressed away from is that Mikel Arteta speaks his mind, and it's wrong. He's a villain. Let's all go after him. Let's all call him entitled. Let's all call him a baby. Let's keep, trying to bang that drum and sort of play out that narrative. Ange Postecoglou is in this space at the moment where people hang on his every word. Don't fall into that trap. Don't fall into. I understand why Spurs fans are doing it, but I don't understand why the rest of the football world is doing it. It's insane. Every manager will lose it at certain points. Mikel Arteta's boiling point was at Newcastle on Saturday, rightly so. And that point will come for Ange Postecoglou. And when that mask drops, everybody's going to be shocked. And I can't wait for the day. Anyway, elsewhere, the injury list grows. I mentioned that there's no news yet on Martin Odegaard. What we found out later in the day, though, is that Martin Odegaard didn't train. Neither did Gabriel Jesus, who, to be fair, we didn't expect to train. But a surprise absentee was Eddie Nketiah. He did not take part in training today, which sort of brings up an interesting question with regards to who's going to play up front on Wednesday night. So we'll get into that a little bit later on when we pick the team. But those three players not available in training or not participating in training today. And then that brings me on to that Thomas Partey thing we were discussing. Is he going to be back before the new year? Well, going by John Cross's report, no, he's not, which is a big, big blow. He'll come back then, potentially be available for the FA Cup third round, but then it's the AFCON. So we could be without Thomas Partey now for a really long period of time. If that's the case, and, he's going to be coming back from a longer term injury, and there are going to be concerns with regards to his fitness over the remainder of the season, I think we need to go out and get a midfielder in January. I really do. And it's going to be one of those situations where Arsenal might have a plan in place for the summer in terms of somebody that they're looking at. We hear that it could be Martin Zubimendi, for example. I think that what Arsenal are going to need to do, what Arteta's going to need to do, is go to the board, go to the ownership, go to Edu and say, we don't want to just sign someone for the sake of it. We don't want another short-term fix. We've got a few of those in our squad, and I think we've got enough at the minute. Can we possibly accelerate the plans that we had for the summer? Is there any way that we can finance this? Is there any way that we can make this happen now so as to protect us in the second half of the campaign? Because for all the criticism that Arsenal have got over the last few months, people saying that we're not playing at the same level and all of that, and I get that to a degree. I think a lot of it's fair. But we are still within touching distance. We are still in the mix, not just for the Premier League, but, in the Champions League. We could be in the last 16 by the end of tomorrow. So, you want to be in a position come the business end of the season to be able to give those things, a real good go. Plus the FA Cup, let's give that a good go as well. And I just feel like if we're going to constantly be without Thomas Partey, we're just still a little bit short in the midfield. We're too close to having a crisis. We're one injury away, essentially. If Declan Rice picked up a problem, we'd be in crisis in that midfield area. And I just don't want us to be in that precarious position. So if this is true, and again, to be clear, to clarify, nothing's come out of the club on this. This is from John Cross of the Mirror. Now, he may well have his sources, but the point I'm trying to make here is that I don't know 100% that this is true. It is just a report at this stage. Okay, let me take you on to the team then that I would select for the game against Sevilla. Now, this is taking into account that I don't think Odegaard's going to be fit. Well, Odegaard might be fit, but the fact that he didn't train today kind of is not a good sign to me. And Nketiah not training is also not a good sign. And we know, of course, that Jesus is going to be unavailable. Mikel Arteta has said as much. This is the team then, taking all that into account, that I would pick. I'd go with Ramsdale in goal. I know some will say, what? Why are we still talking about this? David Raya is the number one now. Get over it. Move on. Listen, I'm picking the team that I want to see picked. And I thought that Ramsdale, when he played against West Ham the other night, was given a really, really harsh appraisal afterwards. I don't think he covered himself in glory necessarily. I don't think it was an outstanding performance for him. But when I go back and I look at the goals, the first one, not only is he fouled, but it's an own goal, and I don't think he can do anything about it. The second one comes off the back of Mohamed Kudus getting a little bit lucky. Now, you might think that was a great bit of control. Go and watch it back again, because this was only brought to my attention like the day after. If you watch, the ball flicks off his other heel and goes into his foot. I don't think he means that. But the finish is great from Kudus. But it was poor defending from Zinchenko and then Gabriel. So I can't hold Ramsdale accountable for that one. And the third one, although you'd argue that the ball went through him, it does take a deflection. So, I think that Ramsdale will be looking at Raya's performances and thinking, I can do better than that. Because let's not forget that Raya, and we touched on this on sort of Sunday's show, escaped a lot of criticism that would have come his way at Newcastle because of the VAR controversy. His positioning and then inability to get anywhere near that cross, plus the decision to go for a cross that you're never going to get anywhere near, was questionable at best. So I think that there is a case that David Raya has not taken his opportunity fully. And so the door should at least be a little bit open for Aaron Ramsdale. And if he doesn't get games, I don't know how we can potentially turn this situation around. I think that Raya will play, but if it were me, I would put Ramsdale in for this one. I really would. I think he deserves a Champions League game. I don't think it's a change that significantly, if at all, weakens us. I thought Raya looked quite comfortable up until the goal at Newcastle, but so did Arsenal just generally defensively. Was his distribution good? It was better at Newcastle, but it's still not at the level where it's obviously superior to Aaron Ramsdale's. And that's where I'm struggling, I think. In terms of my back four, I'd go with Ben White, William Saliba, Gabriel, and this time I'd go with Zinchenko, because I think that Sevilla are going to come and are going to try and frustrate us for periods. And I think this is one of the games where you get away with Zinchenko. We talked about it before, right? And also with Tomiyasu, who we know has had his fair share of injury problems as well. I'd rather just be that little bit more cautious with him as well. I think him and Zinchenko are both quite fragile in that sense, in that they've both frequently broke down with injury since they came to Arsenal. So if you can share the game time and the load between them, and you take into consideration that Tommy played the other day, he replaced White at right back as well, and that sort of opened the door for Zinchenko to come on at left back in the game. So, Tommy played the whole game, basically, is what I'm saying. I think that Zinchenko should be the one, and I think we could do with that build-up player that we're probably going to need to try and break Sevilla down. Jorginho, Fabio Vieira, and Declan Rice would be my midfield. I'd have been tempted to play Emile Smith-Rowe, but of course, he's not available, which is frustrating. Jorginho is fine as far as I'm concerned, as long as he's got Declan Rice alongside him. I thought he was good again at Newcastle, Jorginho. We know what he's about. We know what his strengths are. We know what his weaknesses are. I feel like his strengths, are more visible when Declan Rice is alongside him. And I think his weaknesses are covered up by the fact that Rice is so mobile and is willing to help him out in that sense. Fabio Vieira, form's gone off a little bit. He started the season really positively. He was coming off of the substitutes bench and impacting games and all the rest of it. And, it's just kind of dipped a little bit now. I know it's not easy. When you're not in the team, it can affect your rhythm. And to be in and out is a challenge. But he's one that if he does play tomorrow, I want to see him grab the opportunity, because he really needs to. Bukayo Saka and Martinelli would be my wingers. Let's go get the job done. If you want to play Trossard, play him against Burnley. is how I see it. I was a bit frustrated with Trossard at the end of the Newcastle game based on some deliveries that he put into the box. I just thought they lacked the quality that you need in a circumstance like that. And it's incredibly frustrating when you're running out of time and someone's taking crosses and just can't beat the first man. Like, I know it sounds like a really basic, silly thing to say, but it does really, really get under my skin. Need a performance from Saka, by the way. You know, I'm still waiting for him to kind of burst back into life. And then up front, particularly in the absence of Eddie Nketiah, I don't think there's any debate. I think it should be Kai Havertz. And I'd like to see him play a full 90 minutes at centre forward because I think he's more effective there. I thought actually his performance at Newcastle was one of his better performances. You know, I thought he put himself about well. I thought he physically gave us quite a bit. You know, the attack, generally speaking, was blunt, and he was a part of that. So he can't escape any responsibility for that. You know, he has to take some of it, just like all the other forward players did. But I genuinely think that, you know, he is a better forward than he is a midfielder. I've said this for a number of weeks now, and I'd actually quite like to sit back and have a look at him for a full 90 minutes in a Champions League game. I think that would give us a good indication of course, where he's at. So that's my team. Ramsdale in goal, White, Saliba, Gabriel, Zinchenko, Jorginho, Vieira, and Rice in midfield. Saka, Martinelli in Havertz. Do I think that's what Mikel Arteta will do necessarily? I don't know, is the answer to that. What I definitely don't think he'll do is put Ramsdale in for Raya. I think that he'll want to persist with Raya. He's clearly the number one right now. Champions League is seen as a priority competition, so why wouldn't he continue with him? I think an opportunity could come for Ramsdale in this competition, which I know he's desperate to be a part of. Should Arsenal qualify tomorrow in the sort of remaining games, Lens at home and PSV Eindhoven away, but we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Right, let's take a couple of your questions before we go. Get them in the live chat box. Listener Q&A here on the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. I'll take one or two before I go off and have my dinner. I want to quickly scoff it down before the Dortmund-Newcastle game kicks off. Let's take this one from Think Football, not to take you off topic, but do you ever cover academy football? Not every week. I did do the Arsenal under-21s game against Manchester City the other night for the Arsenal website on commentary. So I always keep an eye on the Arsenal academies because, you know, every so often I get a call up from the club to go and do the commentary on those. I did 3 or 4 last season. I did one last week. So I want to make sure that I'm across it. But I would be lying if I said that I'm super across it. And it's something that I pay loads of attention to on a weekly basis. I check scores. I check scorers. I try and keep across some of the news articles, but that's probably about it. Khalid doesn't want to see Havertz up front. He said he's had 1 shot on target, 0 through balls and 0 chance creation. He should play left, right, out. Oh, you're harsh. You're harsh. You really are. BX Gunner says that Jesus could have potentially scored in every group match. Yeah, could have. But unfortunately, he's not going to be available, which is really annoying. Mafia Boss, just on the Thomas Partey thing, says when you need him most, he's never available. I would unfortunately sell Partey. Now, I agree with you, man. We're getting to that point now, aren't we? Amira says, ironically, we got Raya because he's supposedly better at catching crosses. Yet some of the goals we've conceded with him have been from crosses. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And that's why I think people are struggling with it at the moment. Yeah, I really, really do. Martin AFC says, Harry, quality show this morning. One of the best YouTube shows I've seen in a long time. Thank you so much. Remember, quick reminder that you can check out the debrief with Keith Hackett this week. Now, the debrief, for those of you that aren't familiar, is a show where we're going to expand our horizons a little bit on a weekly basis. We're going to review the big stories from the Premier League. We're going to review some of the stuff from Europe. And I did have planned going into the weekend lots of other stuff. We were going to talk about the Copa Libertadores final. We were going to talk about some of the ongoings in Serie A. You know, we were going to talk about the Classica between Dortmund and Bayern. All of that was on my agenda. But given what unfolded over the course of the weekend, and this is what's great about the debrief, right? It's a blank canvas. I felt the need to kind of have a bit of a gear change and and direction change, basically, and do something that felt hyper relevant. And when Keith agreed to come on the show, I felt like we needed to do that in depth. So yeah, that will happen from time to time on the debrief, and we will bring you extra episodes of the debrief from time to time when there's stuff that I feel really needs covering. Cesar says, as a commentator, do you have like a pre-match routine to soothe your throat? No, I don't. I need to take better care of my throat. I feel like I talk so much because of work that it always feels quite strained, and sometimes I need time off and I don't give it to myself, and really I should. I've had a problem with it over the last few days, and I've really struggled to get through some of the work I've had, but obviously you don't want to let people down. But maybe that's something that I could get some advice on, because it would certainly be helpful. Tutor says, is there any player in the academy that could cover Partey or Jorginho in the midfield? I was having this conversation with Jeremy Ali-Adier the other night. We were talking about why it is that, you don't really see that much of a crossover these days as you did in years gone by between what we used to call reserves and the first team. You don't see first team players dropping down, for example, when they're building their fitness back up in the way that they did in years gone by. You don't see those crossovers happen as often. This is my opinion. I don't think that there's anyone ready just yet. I think that the person that is closest to being ready to making that step up, or the two people, are probably Ethan Nwaneri, and I would say Mario Kozia-Dubry. I would say those are the two that look to me like they could step up at some point, but none of them are going to do a Jorginho or Partey role, I don't think, in our team. So it would be nice if that was an option, but they're not at this moment in time, in my opinion. Mark says, agree with your lineup, but what about Elneny starting and Vieira as a super sub, as he seems to perform better coming off the bench? I don't know that Elneny can progress the ball in the way that we need him to, and I don't know that I would want Elneny and Jorginho in that same midfield. If it was a Carabao Cup game, then I would have been tempted to go that way. But yeah, not for me. I like the idea of Vieira being a sub because I think he performs better. A bit like Trossard when he comes into the game in that context. But yeah, I think that's the team. Like I said, I would have put Smith Rowe in there if he was fit, but he's not. I might put Havertz in there, but we don't have a striker. Maybe Trossard would go in there. I don't know. There's options, of course, but those options are limited at the moment because of the number of injuries that we have, and that list is not getting any shorter, is it? But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much. I'm going to go and stuff my face. I'm going to go and eat. I wonder what the wife's cooked. I haven't even asked. And then I'm going to sit down and watch some Champions League football for the evening. So I'll catch you all very soon. And the next one will be after the Seville game. So hopefully we're talking about Arsenal having qualified for the round of 16. It's been a while, hasn't it? See you all soon. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave us a review. You know the drill by now. I'll see you all next time. Until then, goodbye.